This show is brought to you by Drift Outfitters in Toronto at 199 Queen Street East. Drift is remaining open during these difficult times, but with a new way of getting you your fly fishing goods without allowing customers into the shop. Visit them online at driftoutfitters.com to order products and take advantage of free shipping across Canada on orders over $100. Why not help them out during this difficult time for small businesses? Give them a shout out on Instagram. Got a great photo to share? Tag at Drift Outfitters. Also, you can tag your fly tying pics with hashtag self-isolation to show your friends and your followers how you're spending your downtime. Giving Drift more exposure and love right now is one way we can help keep them going. These are tough times, and we must find a way to continue supporting our community store. Visit driftoutfitters.com for more information. Hello, welcome to another episode of SoFly. It's Trout opener. Can you believe it? April 25th, and we're not on the water. We're in the studio. My name is Mitch, and we've got Aldo.
Hello.
We got Yilma.
Hey, everyone.
We've got a very special guest on the show today. Repeated guest. This is the third time for Joe on the show. Joe, thank you so much for coming back to talk Trout opener with us. Welcome.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I feel honored because this is my first episode with you, Joe.
Is it?
Yeah.
I can't remember. It was so long ago. So
I think your last one was episode 8.
Was it really?
Yes.
Yeah. So you were so much younger then, Mitch.
I know. Look at me now. I got a better microphone now, though. That's for sure. I remember when the last time we recorded, we had the snowball microphone, USB microphones, and we were, oh man, all the levels were all over the place. Good episodes though. But thanks for coming back to talk again with us. We're going to talk today. Obviously, it's Trout opener. And a very interesting Trout opener because none of us are on the water, and we're in fact staying inside because of this COVID thing that's popping around. So it's a strange time for us to be podcasting, but we're going to make the most of it. We're going to talk about trout openers from over the years and some of our best memories. And Joe's been trout fishing Southern Ontario openers for, I don't know, how long, Joe? How long has it been?
Over 40 years.
So there's a lot of good memories in there, I can imagine.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of, when you look at trout season, you have to divide it into pre-internet and internet because the whole spirit of the day is drastically different in those times. Certainly, as a young boy, being 12 or 13, the first days that I remember about trout season were always filled with mystery and anticipation. You just couldn't wait to get on the river and try all the things that you would dreamt about over the winter. And the very first ones I remember were my dad, who was not a sport fisherman in any sense of the word, would sort of grudgingly get up very early in the morning, put me in his car, drive me to any piece of water that he thought existed, proceed to chain smoke a pack of cigarettes on the bank, and let me flail away and try all the things that I had read about in the library and in magazines. Not that successful in those early days. But as I got a little older and started to be able to go out and try different things, I first realized that trout season for me, the opening day of trout season, kind of divided into two areas. One was resident trout, and the other one was lake run trout, because there is a whole culture around both those kind of things that are unique. So, for growing up near Lake Erie, naturally it was all about lake run trout. So you would proceed to the river and, start to fish for these steelhead, which are at the time finished spawning, and they're usually called dropbacks. That's why the trout season is on the day it is to protect them, because they're spring spawners,
Right.
is to protect them and allow them to complete spawning and then begin the journey to the river.
Yeah.
In those early days, what determined your success was the water levels. So if you had a lot of rain before the trout season opened, it usually flushed the river of a lot of those post-spawn fish. They would go back to the lake. But as the case may be, and just like this year, I have the feeling the water wasn't high enough to get them from the headwaters back to the lake. They pool up in these big pools, if you will, these big suspended pods of fish.
Mhm.
And then we as a horde descend upon them and begin to fish for them.
Yes.
So I remember there was one time on the Wilmot Creek where I showed up and went to fish this one beaver pond area on the river, which trapped probably 40 to 60 steelhead, all suspended like cordwood.
Oh man!
And I remember I was fishing bait back then, and I remember casting my, getting there at sunrise. At that time, it was 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Casting my float with a worm on it, and as the float drifted down into the pool, into where the fish were, there were so many fish that the float actually laid down because the line could not get through the density of fish.
Jesus.
And then I thought to myself, what do I do? Do I pull it? Or, naturally, it was almost impossible not to foul hook a fish.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things that I remember back then.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, too, which is very popular with lake run fish, was trout season technically opens at midnight.
Right, yeah.
So in a lot of those eastern streams, Saugeen River, a lot of these places, people would actually begin their journey to the river at 11:30, stand at their favorite spot with their clock. In some places you'd hear a horn, you'd hear guys yell, and then everybody at nighttime with their lanterns would start to fish at midnight. And they'd fish all night.
That's so good.
And in some of those places, it was around the clock. So you would have, there was a pool on the Wilmot right on the highway, and you could drive by there at nighttime and it looked like a football game.
Yeah.
There would be lights, fires, and people just fish around the clock for these fish that are waiting for the water to come up and return to the lake.
Yeah.
So resident trout was a different story altogether. It was resident trout for me was more, it was very hard to catch resident trout on opening day because they just were much harder.
Yeah.
And much fewer, and they weren't as easy to get at. But there was a more romantic aspect to it for stream trout. So, and I have fished stream trout, resident trout with you fellas on opening day, and you can see how it is. You get your gear on, you go down to the river, you make that first cast, and there's nothing like it. The rest of the year, you all know it.
It's the best, man. Such a good feeling.
Yeah. So, but now post-internet, it's completely different. Now you can pretty much know everything that's going to happen, where it's going to happen, and a little bit of the romance and mystery is, I think not there, but it, it still has the excitement for sure.
And of course, we're talking about internet forums and posting on its social media and people saying, "Oh, go to this place, go to that place."
Absolutely. And that's what happens, right? So it's not quite the same as, waiting all winter, calling a couple of friends and saying, have you heard? Then driving there. And then there's that whole thing. Is the log still there? Is the pool changed? I'm going to try this technique now.
Yeah.
As anything, we lament the loss of romance, but I mean, I'm still just as excited as I ever was to get out and fish trout. Yeah. But it's different for sure.
Yeah. Do you think there's going to be hordes of people going out this trout opener? What do you think?
I do. I think you will see. I mean, for example, if you have a private property and you have a trout stream on your property, there's no reason why you can't walk out and fish trout.
Yep.
It'll be up to your discretion to let friends into that. I'm not going to impose on my friends who have trout streams. No. I just don't feel it's right to sort of call them up and say, hey, I'm going to come up and, I won't do that. So,
exactly.
But I do think that there's a lot of open water. It's just when people find the access, as we talked about earlier, the little crack through the door, if you will, there will be lots of people out. I think so, for sure. Yeah. And, those times I told you about on the rivers where you have pools, like on the Ganaraska, where you have pools where you'll have 300 fish stacked, social distancing will definitely be an issue. I mean, the traditional idea of opening day trout season on streams like that are, if you will, the term shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So what is shoulder to shoulder going to look like in this environment? I mean, it will be there.
Yeah. Well, it's funny
unless the government says or the municipalities say you can't fish at the river, we won't let you park
Yeah, exactly, and put up the no
Yeah.
parking signs.
Exactly.
You sent me a picture a couple days ago of Penn trout opener with
Yep.
someone wearing a mask, and it's this
Yeah,
new kind
yeah.
of reality we're looking at, I think, eh?
Well, I think that they feel there, as they do, it's inherent in their culture that it's their right.
Yeah.
So, no one's going to stop me from fishing, and there'll be some people, fishing with masks. Trout season opener in the U.S. is a bit different than it is here. It's earlier,
Mm-hmm.
for one thing. The government heavily stocks and advertises those areas where they are stocking.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you want to create crowds in this environment, dumping 5,000 hungry trout into one spot is certainly going to create crowds.
That's a good way to do it.
That's a good way to do it for sure.
So in Ontario, it's less so. They do stock, but they don't quite advertise it like they do in the U.S. There's not a big arrow saying, go here, there's 5,000 trout.
Yeah.
So,
well, okay. Well, maybe we jump to the phenomenon that is Southern Ontario trout opener. And why don't we go back to how it started for you? You touched on it a little bit pre-internet and talking about, going down and not really knowing what the heck you were doing. But why don't we go back to the early trout openers and just dig into them a little bit more? Was it as packed as it was nowadays?
No, not resident trout.
Right.
There's a civility and a difference in that side of the sport that was evident in resident trout. I always remember going to a river and as a kid, riding my bike or in some instances driving my car, getting to the spot that I was going to fish and the area I was going to fish. You walk out there and anglers generally would not come and fish near you. They would leave this pool for you and walk around you and continue on. I remember that tremendously.
Yeah.
What I did do though, when I was 15, 16, is I did try to go to places where I knew there would be more experienced anglers.
Right.
And I would learn tremendously. So, you look at the, when I was growing up, you look at the places, you go and you could just see a fly fisherman who knew what he was doing. And as a kid, a lot of times I would pretend to fish, but actually I was watching and learning and seeing what they were doing. Those were magical times because it was all still a mystery. The sport still had this sort of mystical aspect to it, which I found very intriguing. The trout usually back then were very, in my experience anyways, they were very small, but they seemed big, like a 12-inch rainbow trout seemed enormous.
Yeah, totally.
And there was a lot more small fish. So I remember one time, one of the early trout seasons I went to with my dad, there used to be a place in Normandale, Ontario called St. William's Forestry Area, and they had a series of trout ponds that they kept.
Yeah.
And I remember going there with my fly rod with my dad, and of course my dad sitting on the bank with a coffee and smoking cigarettes, and myself trying to cast woolly buggers and strip them in. Beside me was a group of about 6 or 7 gentlemen casting Uncle Josh single eggs that came in jars from Canadian Tire, and they were catching one trout after another.
Oh yeah.
And I did not catch anything. So my dad proceeded to tell me that I was not very bright and I should maybe think of doing something else with my spare time.
Yeah.
Well, those were the times. Yeah. So I also remember too as well, a lot of those early days in fishing trout streams, there was, because the internet wasn't there was not a lot of knowledge about streams.
Yeah.
Everybody, they were easy to discover a spot where no one fished. So, it was easy to find uncrowded situations. You didn't have to look very far to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So as it opened up, I remember trout seasons starting to become more crowded in areas around major cities. So of course the credit used to be not that crowded, and then all of a sudden the credit started to become crowded.
Yeah.
There was a river in near a town called Port Dover that I used to fish. I don't mind naming it because it needs friends, clearly. It was a stream called Lynn River.
Mm-hmm.
And Lynn River started in the town of Simcoe and went all the way to Lake Erie. It surprisingly had a great natural rainbow trout population that had been introduced and then took hold.
Yeah.
Some of the feeder streams going into it had wild brook trout.
Yeah.
So I had a great opening day fishing that stream. I would walk to the river, pick a spot that I liked, and had great success doing that with friends that I had at the time.
Yeah. Joe, I think I went on that river about 2 years ago, and I saw a couple of brookies and a huge brown,
carp,
I believe.
Oh, a brown.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful, beautiful stream.
Yeah. Well, it's great that you bring that up, because when I was growing up, it was predominantly brook trout and rainbow trout, which have a real need for a certain water quality. And there was a few brown trout that local sportsmen's organizations would stock. But as the water quality declined over time and became more marginal, the rainbow trout disappeared from harvest and from less favorable conditions, as the brook trout did. But brown trout do better in that kind of marginal water quality. And there today, that population still exists. The brown trout thrive there. They're not very big, but they thrive there. Mm-hmm. The other thing too I remember about early trout days was, most of the time, if you caught it, you killed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, you never let anything go. I mean, I'm talking, 35, 40 years ago. It was like, oh yeah, you had your little tape measure, and if it was over the legal limit, it was in the bag or on the chain, as they say.
Yeah.
It's funny how that changes. I remember that very clearly.
Yeah. I know it's catch and release is like the standard now. I mean, in a lot for a lot of fly anglers.
Well, it is, and it's not because like when you consider trout fishing and the whole idea of trout opener, it's a great barometer on how the health of the population is from one year to the next. Mm-hmm. So, again, citing Lynn River, there was a little stream that went into Lynn River that had wild brook trout, and it was nothing to go every time you went and get your limited brook trout.
Yeah.
Right.
On a fly rod. And then I was one of the few people that fished it because not a lot of people knew about it. Well, taking, you're harvesting fish every time you went. Progressively, it became harder and harder to find brook trout on that stream. And I came to the realization that although I loved eating trout, I would rather buy my trout than take them through harvest, because there wasn't enough trout to sustain that.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
That's really the idea behind catch and release. It's not about the sport of just catching fish and letting them go. It is about preserving the population for the future.
Yeah, there is a very functional benefit to it, right? I mean, if everybody's harvesting, then, like you say, rivers like the Lynn River get hit,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You see it happen all over.
Well, the classic story, I remember one trout opener, I went there to this spot by a bridge, which I had gone many times in previous openers in years past. And I ran into a local angler there who was fishing worms at the time. And he said to me, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm doing fine. How are you?" "Fine." I go, "Have you got any luck today?" He goes, "No." He says, I haven't touched a fish. He goes, "I used to be able to come here years ago, and I would get 3 or 4 rainbow trout in the 18, 20 inch, like 3 pounds. And he goes, I can't, and I would take them home and they would be delicious. I cannot catch trout here anymore."
I don't know why.
I don't know why.
Right? So what do you say, right?
Yeah.
You can't say anything. It is that for sure. Yeah. I think the other thing I remember about the early openers, more so now than then, is the amount of garbage.
Really?
Oh, the early openers less so.
Yeah.
Because people were spread out more, because there was no way to know where things are.
Yeah.
But I would say a big difference between then and now is because of the way media concentrates people in certain areas.
Yeah.
It's just the amount of garbage and the kind of garbage you get.
Right.
So on an opener, people will go. They'll bring a barbecue. They'll bring a case of beer. They'll bring all these things, and most of the time, they're not that aware of removing the garbage. I mean, certainly some do.
Yeah.
But you can see it, and you can see how That's the other thing I remember. The early trout days that I would go to, you would approach the river and the bank was not really worn out heavily, because there just wasn't the pressure that was there. Nowadays you go and it's like the surface of the moon after the first week.
Yeah, it is. It's like a trodden park. There's trails and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. The other thing too, the early trout days that I remember growing up, the techniques that we used then were a little more naive. I'd go and swing a wet fly, or I'd go and fish a weighted nymph. Not probably as efficient as you would nowadays, because again, you have media, you have platforms and the internet that all educate you on how to be more efficient. But back then it was more, I'm going to get skunked 30 times and then, I caught a fish, I learned, and I figured it out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it was more, I was on you to figure it out, trial and error, and learning from books and things like that, and just going and doing it.
It's great you bring that up. I remember one of the trout openers that I went to, again, like I told you earlier, I used to love to go and find experienced fly anglers and watch them and learn. And a lot of those old crusty guys, they wouldn't give you anything. Totally. I remember there was one fly fisherman, and he caught a really nice trout, I remember, and I was amazed. He was fishing back then he was fishing 2 wet flies, and in tandem, a brace, as they say. And I remember he got a really nice brown trout, about 14 inches, and it looked 24 inches to me at the time.
Yeah.
And of course, I got brave enough, and I ran up to him as he was landing it, and he let it go. And I asked him, I said, "Oh, that's a beautiful fish." He said, "Yeah." And then I said, "What did you get it on?" He goes, "Well, you're going to have to figure it out yourself." And I thought, well, okay, I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. It's the way it is, right? But then I've had other fly fishermen on opening days. I remember I had one couple, really nice couple, before I knew how to drive. One opener, I think it was in 1976. They took us to fish the Denny's Dam on the Saugeen River.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
An opener, and that was the first time I had ever seen the spectacle of 300 people in a stretch of water on opening day.
Oh man.
It was like a circus, and I didn't know what to do, so I waited out and got in line between everybody else and just started casting ridiculously, and didn't catch anything.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing that and thinking, my God, this is like the CNE.
Yeah.
That was my first experience on, seeing what the scale of some trout openers were like.
That's crazy for trout opener, eh? Yeah. I mean, we say there are lots of people come down to, the places we go, but it's not like that. I mean, it's not like Pulaski salmon fishing, salmon season.
You've done that. Yes, you've done that.
That is like that. We always hear shoulder to shoulder. And it's like, though it is really, guys wearing baseball helmets because the weights are flying over their heads, like it's.
Yeah.
Pulaski is something else. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing is too, with trout opener too, as well, especially if it's lake run fish, these fish have all spawned. They are now in a mood to eat. So they are, there's a chance for you to get them for sure. They're a little more easier to get in that regard. With resident trout, I always tried, and over the years, as I got to understand insect hatches better and water temperatures and that kind of thing, I started having more success at fly fishing on opening day doing that. And usually the thing I realized, I started to be in the 80s when I started to get out in trout openers, that, fish on opening day at that time, you're not going to be really casting a lot of dry flies. So unless you had a particularly warm spring.
Right.
But I remember there was one opener in, I think it was 1982 or 83, I can't remember, but it was one of those times where I went to a stream called the Beaver River, which is up near Collingwood, I think it is.
Yep.
And I was stupid enough at the time, I thought, well, I just can't take it. I'm going to go and I'm going to be there at midnight.
Oh, nice.
So I remember driving all the way up there and scouting it out and then saying, okay, I slept in my car. I said, I checked my watch. It's midnight. I walk down to the stream. There's flashlights. You see people in different spots, and I found a spot. And I proceeded to start fishing there with my fly rod in the dark, thinking, of course, you're naive at the time, thinking I'm going to catch a fish at nighttime on my fly rod, which you could do.
Yeah.
But I spent the at night fishing, casting in the dark, a woolly bugger over and over again, and didn't get anything. It kept getting snagged over and over again. So, and then when the sun finally came up, I realized and looked at where I was casting, and it was probably only about 6 inches deep.
Yeah. There you go.
So I thought, well,
sun.
That was not very bright.
But you're excited, how can you can't fight
well,
that?
Yeah, it is.
Exactly.
It is. But I remember, the first trouts, I think the first trout opener I ever fished and saw with Mitch, it was up on the Upper Credit, I think, wasn't it, Mitch?
Yeah. Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah, and it was the classic morning of going and getting skunked and then going to Flapjacks and eating way too many bacon and eggs.
Yeah, I love it.
I love that.
I
think it's a good, interesting point to make, like the two kind of camps when it comes to trout opener. I always get drawn to resident trout, but I almost kind of forget about steelhead.
Yeah.
At that time, I'm always so ready for that romance of the smaller stream.
Mm-hmm.
and brown trout.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are situations, Aldo, you're absolutely right, where the two collide, right? Where you have fish that have reached the headwaters and they're post-spawn and they're suspended, and then you have resident trout there as well, right?
Yep.
And you can fish and catch either one in that situation, and that's fine. But a lot of times, if success is what you really want, people seek out those big holding pools.
Yes.
And like I say, if you go to the Eastern Tribs right now, and you see some of those big pools on the Ganaraska, the one pool there they call the File Hole, which is an old factory. It's a huge pool. It'll have 300 steelhead suspended like cordwood.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a spectacle to see without question.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, speaking of which, I got a video from my buddy, and I shared it with Mitch and Aldo, and there was about, I would say, 50 looked like steelheads in a pool, just waiting.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, Yilma. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So, in this environment with COVID and all that stuff, that is a dangerous situation.
Yeah.
Right. When people see fish in that kind of situation, something happens to their head. Something. They forget about everything, and they just do the weirdest things.
Yeah.
I remember I was on the Bronte Creek one year, and I remember fishing, casting to, this was an opening day, and there was dropbacks, just like Yilma was describing. And I remember I found a little pool. There was, maybe 8 or 9 steelhead suspended in it, and I began to sort of figure out what fly and drift through there with my fly without trying to harm the fish or foul hook the fish.
Yeah.
And 2 fishermen came up, walking up the center of the river, and I thought, that's really odd. Why wouldn't they walk on the path? But they were sort of walking, following the contours of the river. And when they got to where I was, they stopped and looked at me and smiled and nodded, and then they looked and they could see the fish suspended. Well, what do you think they did? The one guy took his 2-handed net, and his other friend began to sort of walk around the edge of the bank and spook the fish so they would run down toward where he was with his net, and he scooped one up.
Jesus.
And I'm standing there on the bank thinking to myself, did this just happen? Like, no one would believe me if I described it. And he smiled, and the two of them turned around and they started laughing and slapping each other on the back. Why use a rod? Like,
yeah.
To me, it's something you would only see on opening day. Like those. That's the other thing too. I remember about opening days. While I sought to see people that knew what they were doing, it also drew out the Philistines, if you will, the people that didn't believe or didn't understand and only fish once a year.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that really don't know how to they sort of how to share a river, and they don't really understand that. So Those are scary.
Yeah. It's like going to the gym after New Year's, and everybody has their resolutions.
That's a great analogy.
That is a great analogy. It is kind of like that.
Everyone's like, I'm going to go this is the year I learn how to fish.
Yeah.
And then they show up. They show up to
yeah.
the river and
Catch
maybe they
nothing.
don't catch anything. And
I also think that's a great point too, as well, that in that situation, I always remember too, opening day of trout season, it's not a fly fisherman's day or a bait fisherman's day or a hardware fisherman's day. It brings them all together. It brings all these techniques together in one particular situation. And then you have different ideas and cultures kind of clashing. So you have me trying to cast my fly to these fish, and then you have another guy who comes in with a giant piece of hardware and he casts through the pool. Then you have another guy who wants to cast his rod and put it with his worm and put it on a stick. Opening day of trout season is probably the only day of the year that you get a high propensity of that, for sure.
Yeah. All the anglers together in one place doing their thing.
And techniques.
Yeah.
Right. And they all have a right to be there.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
100%.
Right. So how do you do that? How do you deal with that?
Yeah. And also, like, how do you not, excuse me, scare somebody away from a sport that, we all love too? Like opening day, a new fly angler shows up to the river like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
It would suck if they got intimidated instead of excited,
That's a great point. That's a great point. And how do we do that, right? How do we bring people into the sport and for them to be compassionate and understanding? How do you do that?
Yeah. Instead of like a noob showing up to the river and then having people like give him the side eye, being like, "Oh, look at this guy."
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
it's happened.
Oh, for sure. It happens to me now, and I have people, what you're Gramps, you don't know what you're doing. So, and even more so now, that's the other thing too as well. For me, fly fishing, it's just not enough to catch a fish. There's a certain aesthetic that I like in the technique that you use.
Yeah.
And it just happens to be that a lot of times the techniques that I use are things from the past, swinging a wet fly perhaps, or casting a dry fly. So you get young anglers, year-own infers, and people that are really smart and really good at what they do. When they look at you, do they look at you and say, there's a person who respects tradition, or they look at you and say, there is a person that is missing half their brain?
Yeah. I know, it's true. It's a good point you hit on, actually. April Vokey did a show a little while back with a fella, and they were talking about respect for people that came before in fly fishing, and how there's a pretty big culture right now, because there's so many people, I think, getting into it that are almost forgetting about the history and traditions that came before, and kind of like it's their way is the right way, and it's a weird sort of thing to happen in fly fishing.
Oh, it is very much so. When I went to fish Spring Creek in Pennsylvania, one of the great bamboo fly rod builders of all time was a man by the name from Michigan called Paul Young. His rods are quite valuable, and I actually found a place on Spring Creek where he used to go on a regular basis and stand and fish. And I went and found that spot and actually stood in this exact spot that he did and cast a bamboo rod. And it was that, to me, is that's where I find joy in the sport, right? That to me is what I look for. And that's, you read books all winter long, you read about history, and then a trout for me is to go and, sort of relive that romance and create your own moments.
Exactly. So much of fly fishing is about the history of it and learning techniques from people that came before and learned the rivers and had these moments on the rivers, and it's such a deeply historical experience in a way. So it's strange that there's this culture that's just completely throwing that out and saying like, oh, you just got to do this stuff. It's a weird thing that happens. I don't know why.
Well, it's a great point. It's a great point. There was one particular trout opener I remember. It was in the early 90s or late 80s, I can't remember. And I remember I had now become pretty good at nymphing, and I understood how to get the present the fly at the level of the fish in that water level at that time of year, and I was having some success. And I remember showing up on it was at the Credit River at the time, and there was an old fly fisherman that I knew there, and he fished a bamboo fly rod. He fished a wet fly. He would never put any any weight on his line at all, because in his mind, that was not what he envisioned the sport to be.
Yeah.
And I remember, showing up and saying, I had a great morning. He said, I've got 6 browns. I said, I had one that was like 16 inches. Mm-hmm. And he said, and what did you use? I said, well, I used a nymph, and I showed him, and I had this weight. He goes, my God. He goes, that is so barbaric.
That's fun.
And I didn't feel insulted. I actually felt kind of inspired. I thought, I kind of get what he's getting at. There's so much joy in doing something. Fly fishing for me, casting a fly rod with lots of weight and big flies, that's successful, and I think that's fine. But I don't get as much joy out of casting a fly rod with nothing on it except a mono leader and a dry fly or a wet fly. Mm-hmm. There's an art and a feeling that you get from that. And then when a fish graces itself with its presence and approaches your fly and takes it, it just feels good. It's just, for me, that's what I get joy out of. It's not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what I strive for. And in the past, that's traditionally the way they would approach it. To them, it was more sport.
Well, I think there are stages to the fly angler's life, like there are stages to when you do certain things and in life and when you switch it up. And I think if everybody just respects, the stages of a fly angler's life, that's great. If you're having fun and you're in a dry fly phase of your life, like that's awesome.
I think that's a good point, Mitch. I was going to say, like, and Joe, I love the idea of finding joy. And I think Mitch, you hit on a good point there. I think now we are exposed to so many techniques, whether it be Euro nymphing or modern, streamer techniques or what have you, that I hope that people, what I don't like is like that judging of what people find joy in. It's like, if you want a Euro nymph with a squirmy worm, do it. If you want to cast nothing but dry flies, do it. Like what does it matter how people fish? Like, I don't understand the obsession of people judging the way other people fish, of course, unless it's something to do with like the ethics of fish handling or whatever.
Well, it's funny. That's a great point. It's sort of like this idea of elitism.
Right.
And it pollutes the sport, where you have someone that says, I only want to fish dry flies and I only want to fish a certain way. People that are have more successful techniques like Euro nymphing, they'll say, well, you just don't know what you're doing and you're just covering up the fact that you don't know how to catch fish. But I do think that it does make people feel that way. If I say, well, I'm going to fish this way, it does make people feel bad, and it happens to be more in fly fishing than anywhere else. And I think that's a shame, because to Aldo's point, we should say, I really like watching you catch fish on squirmy worms, even though I'm not going to do it. But there'll be a time where if I go long enough without catching anything on a dry fly, there's going to be handfuls of squirmy worms going into the river. So
100%. It's, I think it is, though, like it's a fine line, right? Because there's something to be said also about respecting tradition and having respect for, what fly fishing is. I think that's another whole other thing, but Aldo's right. I mean, it's not don't put people down. It's just I don't know. It's this weird kind of fine.
I don't think it's like, it's not about one or the other. I think it's both. And it's like you learn the traditions from the past and you think that they're interesting, and it's cool to know where the sport comes from and where this and how those techniques evolved other techniques, and how maybe like swinging wet flies during a hatch is actually quite effective, because that was the first emerger pattern, if you will.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, it was.
Before like modern emerger patterns, like that's what a wet fly is.
Yes.
So they still work, and they still really work. They just, it's like you said, cycles of a fly fisherman's life. Like I think like I've really enjoyed Euro nymphing the past 3 years, but I'm probably going to, I feel myself getting away from it, and wanting to learn how to fish a streamer more effective, for example.
Well, it's a great point. I remember, again, earlier trout openers in those days, we used to do something called high stick nymphing. which was you have a long fly rod, you have 9 feet, 8 feet, and you would have very long leaders, and you'd hold the rod up really high, and you would drift through pools that way. It wasn't the most fun way to cast a fly rod, but it was highly efficient. The difference was then is that you had weight on the leader, not built into the fly. So the presentation was harder to gauge the depth at which it is. Euro nymphing takes that concept even further. So it takes longer rods, longer leaders, and it concentrates all the weight in the fly. Very efficient at getting down to the level of where fish are in, heavy water, especially in the spring. Yeah. So, but does it feel as much like classic fly fishing to me? Well, no. Ask me if I'm having success dry fly fishing, then it doesn't. But if I'm getting skunked for 3 months, then Euro nymphing is the great way to fish.
Totally. Yeah. I know that's the thing for me. It does come down to that as well. Like, if you're in the middle of an amazing dry fly hatch, like, appreciate it, right? Take advantage of it, obviously. I think that's a great moment.
That's definitely one thing I think every fly angler can agree on, is that ideally getting one on a dry fly is the best.
Oh yeah, it's the best.
Yeah, and it's not old school. To me, it is just a joy to catch a trout on a dry fly. I remember there was one opener specifically. I think it was mid '90s, and I remember Hendricksons don't usually start till the Saturday after opener, or even later than that. But for this particular spring, it was very warm, and I remember going down to the river, and I really didn't know my insect hatches that well, and I was nymphing, and a fish rose, and I wasn't looking for bugs. A fish rose, and then another fish rose, and then another fish rose, and I had not made the connection between there was insects leaving the river and these fish were eating them. And I remember trying to figure out, and then I saw another fly fisherman, an older guy, downstream from where I was, and he started catching one after another. And I asked him, at the time, I said, when we were leaving the river, I said, "You did really well." I said, "What were you doing?" He goes, "What? I was fishing the Hendricksons." I go, "You were fishing the what?" He said, the Hendricksons. He said, the mayflies. I said, "Mayflies? They were." Oh, I said, "Those were mayflies?" Oh, I get it. I said, "I understand now. Thanks." I go, "Can I see your Hendrickson?" He goes, "You don't want to see my Hendrickson." He goes, that was the other thing that I really was like so obsessed with in the early days, was everybody had a different Hendrickson pattern.
Right.
And I wanted to see what everybody's was like, because everybody fished them and had their own interpretation of what they looked like.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the patterns, you have your own Hendrickson patterns as well. Like, have they developed over the years and changed over the years?
Well, the way I fish Hendricksons, and specifically Hendricksons, but most other insect hatches now, is if you look at history and you look at fly design, those flies were designed for different impressions in the water, in different kinds of water quality.
Yeah.
So if you go and look at a comparadun, that fly fishes really, really well at its best, not always, but at its best in long, flat water situations where you need a pattern that sits flush in the surface and creates the kind of light pattern that an insect would in that situation. Now, if you go to the upper credit where you have choppy riffles, Catskill style flies that create an impression, they tend to work really well in those kind of situations. And then you have other patterns that history had sort of selected and said, this works in this kind. I tie them all.
Yeah.
So that's why you have a fly box. That's why you have a fly box with compartments.
Yes.
So, and when I approach the river, I say to myself, okay, this is a riffle. I'm going to use a Catskill kind of fly on this. It's probably going to work really well. If I'm on the Grand and you have those long flat pools like at the Trestle Bridge where Mitch caught that one trout on that he took the video of.
Yeah.
Well, flies that sit a little lower in the film and the sit flush, they'll probably present a better light impression and be more successful. History has shown that, right?
Yeah.
That's what you do. You read and you look at fly design, and it's just not something coming out of someone's head. They've actually looked at the water and they've had success that way.
Yeah.
And again, I think that is the point of, I think that a lot of those dry fly people, those older guys, the respect for dry fly fishing, you have to be more in tune with what's going on, and it's case by case and trial and error, and there is a lot that goes into it. So you got to respect that. I mean, I love all that stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, some of the great flies. If you look at Catskill flies and Art Flicks flies, those flies are as effective now as they were then, if they were tied the way they were intended to be used.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
So, that's the thing. Those flies still work in the situation where the water quality is the same.
Yes.
Right. That's the key. So, I mean, you met Fran Betters. You saw his fly that he tied, and you saw the river, the Asabo that he fished on.
Yep.
That fly was designed to float like a cork in that water.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the Asabo wolf. It's a great fly.
Yeah.
I love that water. Oh my God. I'm just thinking about all the trout fishing places right now, and I'm dying. Guys, I'm dying.
It's good that you bring up New York, because that was growing up in Ottawa. Like when trout opener came around, I was like, so what?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like we didn't have
we didn't
trout up there.
I thought about that.
So-
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So I've lived in the GTA now for 11 years, and it's really then that I got the fervor of trout opener. For me, trout opener meant going to New York, upstate New York, and fishing the Shadow Gate. I couldn't wait to get on the Shadow Gate.
That's so cool.
The best.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Mitch, and I was thinking trout opener for him growing up was probably not that big of a deal.
It really wasn't.
No.
We grew up in Ottawa.
It wasn't a thing. It didn't exist. The only thing I knew about trout opener was from the forums, because I followed some of the Southern Ontario forums to see what was going on in here, because I knew trout was here.
Interestingly enough, Pulaski.
And Pulaski, yeah. And of course, like you say, upstate New York, that was the place that we went. Trout opener wasn't a thing. Bass opener was always a thing. That was always the biggest deal. But
for me, trout opener 1982 was the first year that I went and fished the eastern tributaries.
Yep.
And those are streams like the Wilmot that run through Newcastle, Bowmanville, Duffins. They run through these small towns. And the opener of trout season there was something much bigger than it was where I experienced it, because it was the populations weren't concentrated in towns quite like they were there.
Right.
And trout opener was a big deal for everybody, not just fishermen at the time. And I realized that when I fished the Wilmot in 1981 or 82, the first time I fished it on an opener, and seeing the townsfolks standing on the bridge, like there was a crowd. There would be like 30 people that weren't fishermen that were just there watching the spectacle, if you will.
Yeah, it is a spectacle, you know. People don't know about it. It's like this underground fishmas that happens every year, and people do come and watch.
And it's funny, 1982 was also the first time I had ever seen my first opening day trout season fist fight.
1982?
Oh my God.
Right? So you have all these people concentrated in one pool, like the one Yilma described. You have 60 people around this pool. You have one guy who hooks a fish. He's fighting it. He yells fish on. He wants everybody to take their lines out. Of course, everybody doesn't. His line goes through the pool, catches everybody's line. You have this ball of monofilament around this thing. And then you have another guy giving him shit because he's taking too long to fight the fish. Next thing you know, the rod hits the ground. Next thing you know, there's two guys rolling around on the bank, punching and fighting each other. And you have people on the bridge from the town laughing and yelling and saying, "Yeah, hit him, hit him!" And you have other people making food on the bank, watching this spectacle, and it's just
chaos.
Opening day of trout season,
Ontario. Keep stay
it's
classy,
like Catalina
Ontario.
wine mixer.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
The scene, man. Oh
it is
my
funny
God.
though. It is those. That's a good point. I was reading that little article that CBC News put out about Southern Ontario trout opener.
Yep.
And the Pickering, the Pickering or the Whitevale, which is a little town near Duffins Creek.
Yes.
A residents association. They're like, we love trout opener. People come up the night before. They're in our restaurants.
Yeah.
We're cooking food for them. They're staying in our hotels. They're like, we would love for it to be happening. It's just we just don't think it's the the time. So it is cool how those little towns in the eastern tributaries really, it's like it's an event.
Yeah.
Well, it is. And and you go to the local restaurant, and there's people in there and waiters eating bacon and eggs. Oh yeah, for sure. It's like I say, I never saw that where I came from. when I fished sort of, the Lake Erie trips. It was only until I went there that I started to see how much, because these towns were, they were on these rivers. The rivers were intrinsically connected to them as a community. And the return of the fish to spawn was a big deal. Yeah, and it to Aldo's point, yeah, it attracted a lot of people from the U.S., from all over the place, to go and fish for these trout on opening day, for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Joe, I'm actually texting you a video right now. I think I do have your cell phone number of the stream in Port Dover, the one he's talking about.
Lynn River.
Yeah, maybe you can. And I zoomed in on the fish. It looks like a brown, but let's see what it.
I fished that Lynn River once, and I was at this little pool, and there was like 3 giant carp in it, and I was throwing little olive woolly buggers at them, and they didn't care at all. I was just
so funny.
I was like, I'll easily catch one of these things, and they were just like not even like for 40 minutes, like just right in the front of their face over and over again, and they're just like, nope.
Well, it's funny. There's a good example of a river that if you do nothing to it, you let the 3 species of trout, brook trout, rainbow trout, and brown trout, you do nothing over 30 years. As the water quality degrades, you'll have one that actually will succeed in that environment until it gets so bad that nothing can live.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that river it needs a friend for sure, without question.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, again, shore development and everything else, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
No, but I would say a lot of my openers were there. Because it was close to where I was growing up, and in the early days I could ride my bike or walk.
That's awesome.
And it was quite memorable. It wasn't until I moved out, out toward the east end, that I started to see these, Ganaraska, Duffins, Bowmanville, Wilmot, those rivers.
Yeah.
And that was a completely different experience for me. From a trout opener, it was a completely different experience. You actually had, in most cases, a lot of the openers that I used to go to then, you would have to go and sort of stake out your spot. So you would have to get there at 11 o'clock, maybe earlier.
Yeah.
Put up your little lawn chair or whatever and say, this is my spot.
Yeah. Back off.
Back off is right. So, I needed the Soulfly crew back then to sort of build a posse kind of thing.
Exactly.
So,
take over a whole section.
Back.
Yeah, take over a whole section of the river.
I'm not familiar with a trout opener without Joe. So yeah, because every year was with
you. Well, you started fly fishing, and we went out. We did. I mean, I think you started fly fishing right at the beginning of trout season.
Yeah, because I took the casting lessons up in Orangeville.
Yeah.
Which I still think is a really cool trout pond. One of my faves. So clean, so well kept. And then we went out.
I love that. I love fishing in a stock pond.
Yeah, that trout pond
is
so beautiful.
No, I mean, I feel like if anyone,
I'm kidding, Yelma. It's just like it's funny because it's like, oh, it's so much high success rate.
Yeah, exactly. But if anybody wants to learn how to cast and how to fly fish, the trout pond that I went to in Orangeville. Oh my god, I keep forgetting the name.
Wasn't it Murray? Wasn't his name Murray?
Murray was the instructor.
Yelva got less casting lessons for Christmas. It was a whole year. It was a whole thing. But I got a fly rod and casting lessons for Christmas. And then I met him, and he's like, "I'm learning how to fly fish," and the rest is history.
And you brought him to the river, and he was in saltwater boots.
He was in saltwater boots. Good times, man.
That was awesome.
Yeah. Well, I see tweed and a pipe soon for
Yelma.
Absolutely.
So.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, so you know what I realized, Joe? We never Mitchie's Fishies 5'd you because we didn't have that segment on the show when we had you on last. Because I think it was episode 8.
Will it hurt?
It won't hurt. Not like that burger you had last night. That burger.
No,
was
that was
else.
bad. I feared that.
So delicious.
It looked so good. Oh my god.
Okay, wait. I found out the name of the trout pond. Yeah. Primrose.
Okay.
Primrose. Their trout actually are very delicious.
Oh really?
I bought their trout from them. Just gone.
Oh, cool.
To buy trout because I do that now. I love eating trout, but I'd rather support a farmer than bonk a wild fish.
Totally.
Yeah. Exactly.
Especially a nice farm like that.
They really keep their land amazing and clean, and they're just wonderful people as well. Very friendly. It's great. Anyways, I digress.
Okay, so we've never Mitchie's Fishies 5'd you, Joe. So we're gonna do that now. It's the 5 questions that we ask every guest on the show. 5 same 5 questions. Let's do it. Let's jump into it.
All right.
Okay, so this first one of Mitch's Fishies 5 is, what is your favorite fish and why?
Well, that's always a tough one for me, but I would have to go with brown trout.
Yep.
It is in my opinion anyways, it is the intellect of the trout species, and it tends to provide great sport in that. Whereas the brook trout will come to a fly, it really doesn't care. It'll hit anything if it's there close enough. Rainbow trout, they're not, you can catch them on dry fly, yeah. But brown trout, to me, they, out of their ability, how difficult they are to catch, translates to a false intellect, if you will, and I get great pleasure in being able to catch one of those when I do. I just think the aesthetic of them are amazing when you look at them with the big spots. And as they get older and crankier, they get uglier and meaner and more carnivore-like. So
yeah,
I love that fish. Yeah,
beautiful fish, man. Oh my god. Okay, number 2 is, if you could fish anywhere in the world right now, assuming it's like the best time to go, where would you go and why would you go there?
Well, it's funny, I have fished in many places in North America, that's for sure. I fished in Arizona, I fished in a lot of places, but you always come back to some place close to home, and for me, it would be the Upper Credit River. But I'm going to add a twist to this.
Yeah.
It would be the Upper Credit River in 1971.
Okay.
Because for me, there is just such a romance to that time then. There was less traffic on the road, and it was just such a beautiful place then. It just felt trout.
Right. It's just a different kind of, it's changed quite a bit since then.
Yeah, I mean, it's pre-internet.
Yep.
It's just a time where you go and you see the classic fly fisherman there with his vest and his pipe and his boots, casting a wet fly. It's like, that's fly fishing to me. And the water there in that particular area is very suited to that. It's, it's very similar to all the Catskill rivers in the cosmetics of it. And, those are the stories I read growing up as a kid. So for me, more so than fishing upstate New York, which I've done, or even Spring Creek in Pennsylvania, the limestones, which I love deeply, for me, that particular area, in that particular time is where I'd love to be.
That's a great answer. I love it. Well, we'll recreate 1971 as best we can this year. We'll get, like you say, Yilma and some tweed. We'll give him a pipe and toss him in the river. It'd be good. Okay, number 3, Mitch's Fishies 5, is, what is your best or favorite fishing memory? Trout opener memory, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I have a memory from a trout opener. It was probably in the 70s. And it's a great memory for me. I've had a lot, for sure, in my mind. But there was one in particular I remember. I was fishing with 2 friends, and we were fishing Lynn River. And I remember we were fishing this one particular pool. We'd fished there. We got there in the dark, of course, like idiots, cast, nothing. It was about noon. The can of beans we brought had already disappeared. And we thought, okay, well, what are we going to do? Let's go home. So the other guys were all packed up. They're waiting for me on the path. They said, come on. And I said, one more cast. So I cast a leadwing coachman wet fly that I had bought at the local sports store. And lo and behold, I hooked a trout, and it was a rainbow trout, and it was 16 inches long. And it fought like crazy. My friends dropped their gear on the bridge. They came running down the path. Everybody jumped in the river to wrestle this 16-inch rainbow trout. Got it on the bank. My one friend got a log and just totally decimated it with the log. And then the three of us, like, all put our hands around it like you would a bat if you were trying to, and we were all like, success. We had, and then I remember walking home carrying this beat to dead rainbow trout. We all took turns carrying it. Yeah. So, it's like, you carried it long enough, I'm going to carry it the rest of the way.
Yeah, we did it. We actually accomplished this. We got the fish.
We got the fish.
Yes. We got the fish.
You didn't get the fish alone. We got it. I hit it with the log on the bank.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, number 4 is, why do you fly fish?
Well, I think I fly fish because there is 2 things: an aesthetic and a sense of decency
Yeah.
That I love about the sport.
Yeah.
I'm not big on competition in fly fishing. I don't like it, because for me there should be no competition in fly fishing.
Mm-hmm.
It should be about creating, being in a situation where you can leave the world behind and all of the aspects of the world behind,
Mm-hmm.
and just enjoy the sounds, the smells, the feeling of casting a fly rod with a well-tied fly.
Yeah.
There's just something. And then the other fly fishermen that you meet, they're polite, they share information with you, they give you space, the camaraderie of it.
Yeah.
For me, that's what it's all about. You're just not held to the same, expectations you are in the rest of your life. It's just about enjoying.
It's true. It is. It is like something you can just completely indulge in,
Yeah.
I mean, a great trout opener is that kind of day for me,
Sure it is.
Great breakfast, absolutely. Good camaraderie, catch some fish, enjoy outside, listen to some birds. I mean, that's a good day.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Number 5. I'm very excited to know, Joe. I don't think we've ever asked you this. Joe, if you were a fly, what would you be? What fly pattern represents you best, and why?
So there is a great Catskill fly tyer named Art Flick.
Mm-hmm.
And he came up with a series of flies, or refined a series of flies called variants. And specifically, there was one fly in there called a Dun variant, D-U-N. And that would be me. Why do I love that fly? Well, it really is essentially one or two materials tied to the right proportions on the right hook in the right way.
Yeah.
Is an absolutely deadly fly. You come July, August, or even September on any river that has, Isonychia.
Yeah.
I will fish with anybody and have great success with that technique over any other technique. It's a dry fly, and it's just, to me, it represents the simplicity and the elegance of what I like about things like that. I like things that are so simple, but yet so elegant, and can be as complex as you want, because you could have people argue about the true color of what dun is.
Yeah.
Right. So I have a cape that I have from the 70s that if you look really closely at, it's little flecks of brown in it. It's dun, but has little that is what Art Flick, that's what brings that element to that fly, I think.
It's a great fly. I mean, you explained it perfectly. It is I'm looking at it right now. It's a very, like you say, pure, simple pattern that is just very clean, but classic looking, in a way.
Well, I had a friend who didn't believe in the success of a pattern so simple could be so successful. So we went out on, I think it was the second week of September, on the Upper Credit, and we walked up to where, fish to this one section. We started fishing, and I said, "All right," I said, "Here you go." I said, "Tie one on." I gave him one. I said, "Start fishing." I said, "I'd start by that seam along that log." Well, lo and behold, first drift along the seam, 14-inch brown trout comes up and takes his variant. And he was like freaking out. I can't believe this, because the fish wasn't rising. The fish was looking up because of the tendency of the Isonychia to be sporadic in the way it hatches.
Yeah.
You don't have to find it rising. You can go and just cast and walk and continually catch fish on a dry fly, because the hatch is sporadic.
Yeah.
I see.
That's awesome. Great answer. I love that. That's it for Mitchie's Fishies 5. You did.
Well, I survived.
You survived it.
You survived.
You took us. Okay, so you took us through history of trout openers from your past, all the way from the early days, pre-internet, to into the 80s, and learning hatches and learning, from old guys to figure out what's on their line. And we've gone now through some Mitchie's Fishies. Let's talk now about present day. We've done some trout openers together. They're always a blast. We always have the most fun. It kicks off the whole year of fishing. Guys, what are some of our best memories from trout openers in the last few years? I mean, God, last year or the year before last, one of those two was just like crazy dynamite.
My first trout opener with you guys was the day after Gab's wedding.
Yes.
Yes.
And I was still working at Pretty Ugly, which is a cocktail bar in west end of Toronto here, and there's only ever 2 people working there. This is only important because that's how long it takes to clean the place.
Yeah.
So it's we would get out of there probably about 4:30, 4:45 in the morning after cleaning.
Yeah.
And I remember, booking the Saturday off.
Yeah.
But working the Friday night. And I was like, I'm just going to go straight to the river after work. I'll sleep for like a couple hours at the river, and then I'll wake up and I'll just be there.
Yeah. Exactly.
And you guys had Gab's wedding.
Yeah. We did.
And I woke up at the river. And Rob from Drift Outfitters was already in the river. And because this was like 7:30, so I'm eating some food and putting on my waders, and he just lands this massive, like, I want to say somewhere 16, 18-inch brown trout.
Yeah.
Like, I see him stumbling down the river a la Brad Pitt in River Runs Through It. And he lands this fish, and I should have just known right then that today was going to be the craziest trout opener I've ever had.
Yeah, it was super
It was
fun.
snowing. And then the sun came out, and then we fished the morning, and I caught a couple fish, some good fish, and then you guys showed up, and
Yilma. Remember when Yilma netted that trout right when we got in the water, and he like freaked out. He almost had a heart attack.
Yeah, you guys met me up at like further upstream.
Yeah.
And you guys had brought burgers because you were hungover.
You gotta.
And I was like, sweet burgers.
You gotta.
And then Mitch, you were like, let's go meet Joe.
Yeah.
Down at the Grange.
We followed the smell of cigar and found Joe in the woods.
and we started at the Grange, and yeah, I hooked a fish pretty early on, and Yilma
lost.
Well, Yilma, you tell the story.
Oh yeah, well he hooked up into a brown. I honestly didn't I'm newer to the sport, so I'm super excited. And Mitch and I have tried before, and we're still getting to know the river a little better. And then all of a sudden, like Aldo's like, got one, and I'm like, what the beep? And I ran over with my net because I wanted to get it was a brand new fish pond net. I wanted to get it wet and feel some sort of success. And I was nervous because I didn't want to lose this brown. I mean, like, this is an epic moment. Those browns are picky. And it was a successful net, and I just went crazy. And I blacked out, and I was yelling.
He blacked out.
Because like it was like natural excitement.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
You let out like a wild man scream.
I actually heard him. I was downstream, and I actually heard, and I thought someone got hit by a car or something.
Exactly. It was like that moment when you were a kid and hitting that trout.
Yeah.
Like it was like that kind of a moment because Yilma just, he's just getting into the sport, and he finally saw trout in his hands, and he's like, "Holy crap, man, this is gonna be a good day."
Mitch, Yilma, and I all like hugged.
Yeah.
yeah.
It was the start. It was the start of the day, and it was like our first trout opener together. It was a fun moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the day, it was just balling, man.
And then, like you said, like you smelled the cigar smoke, and then Joe materializes out of the woods.
He's like, "What are you idiots doing?"
You're like, "What are you guys doing? Come downstream with me."
Yeah, and that was it.
Well,
we did.
Which leads me into because I have a couple of good moments. One a little self-serving, and one that I actually quite liked because it was about learning how to properly get that fly down there, or that squirmy worm, I should say.
Yeah.
And Joe was like, "Hey, there's one there. No one could see it. It's in this pool. I forget exactly where it was." And he was telling me how to cast and let the squirmy
fly
worm
get down.
naturally sort of like get down there. And I think I was doing it for like 20 minutes, and he's like, "Okay,
40.
I'll show you." Okay, maybe 40 minutes.
2 hours.
I'll show you. First cast. Oh, yeah, there it is.
Yeah, that was
And it
hilarious.
like 24. I think it was like 22 or 24 inch brown.
Man, it was a
big fish.
huge brown.
Joe, I still have that photo that I took.
It was
Yeah.
a huge
It was a
brown.
nice fish.
Hey,
It was
can
a
you see
nice
the-
fish.
Can you
Yeah,
see
there
the
it
camera,
is.
Joe?
Yes.
That's such a nice fish, man. Oh my god.
There it is.
That was one cast.
A little
That's
kite
so
on that
funny.
too.
It was that fish was crazy. Mitch had just landed a fish for me,
Yeah.
and as I'm landing it, Joe's like, hooked up on this
Yeah.
huge fish.
Yeah.
And then I still remember it. I remember it like Joe got caught in a branch or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we had to.
Yeah, it's right. You actually netted it for me. I wouldn't have landed it without you. It actually ran downstream around this log, and you got it with the net for me. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful fish.
And I was like, this is the craziest trout opener
It was fun,
I've
man.
ever
It was
been
crazy.
part of.
Yeah. I mean, like you say,
So-
for a couple of Ottawa people, and Yilma, like not really ever having trout openers. It was a good experience.
Yeah, absolutely. one more thing that actually felt really good
Yeah.
was it was last year, and Aldo and I were on the river, and conservation officer comes up to us to check, make sure that we have barbless hooks, fishing with the right gear and everything. And he looks at my line, he looks at my fly, and he goes, "Wow, you guys know what you're doing, and you guys respect the river." And that felt good. That was a nice moment.
Yeah.
That's
good.
all.
That's good, Yama.
Yeah, man. The progression of knowledge and skill
It's good, man.
is extremely
Practice makes perfect.
amazing. Yeah.
Joe, what are
All
you looking forward to this year, Joe? When it comes to trout, I mean, it's like I said, a strange time. We can't go out right now, but
It's like your personal trout opener.
yeah.
Well, yeah, what I'm looking for is, I have to say that I don't want this to be a bit of a downer, but I'm looking for things to be not as bad as they've been. So every year I go to an opener, and more people, the populations and development gets more and more and encroaches on the what little water we have left, and the experience begins to be diminished. I'm hoping that it's not that way. I'm looking forward to it being a little more decency, a little more compassion or understanding on the river, and a little more care. That's what I'm looking forward to. So, and like I say, the water quality keeps getting worse. I mean, I love your initiative that you have now with the trash flies. That's brilliant.
Thank you.
And I think that's the kind of thing that can make a difference. That's what I'm looking forward to in the end, is for things, hopefully to be good and allow us to be able to fly fish the way we want to fish and catch fish and have a good time. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah. I think that I mean, obviously we completely agree, and we're trying to do that too. And Drifters and, other angler groups and anglers are doing that. I mean, there is a positive push into that direction we're seeing with different organizations, try to limit it, some drink fish, and I think that the more people we see fly fishing and getting into it and taking and being accepted into the community, to Aldo's point earlier, feeling like part of the community and not developing bad habits and being an asshole, but being part of this thing that is bigger than themselves, and it's about respecting the river and the water and the fish. I don't know. I'm optimistic. I feel like that stuff could come.
I hope so.
I hope so too.
I think so too.
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
I loved what you said, Joe. When I first fished the Credit River, I really did. There is a romance to that area. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And maybe it is because it looks like those little small streams that I fished in upstate New York.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of that.
But
It really is.
it's just where I like to fish the most.
Well, the hatches are very similar. The thing is with the Credit River that attracts me the most to it, and why, is because it was predominantly a mayfly river.
Right.
Because the water quality was so pristine in the early days. It was predominantly a mayfly and stonefly river, which require really excellent water quality. As water quality degrades and becomes less good, you have less mayflies and you have more caddisflies. You have more marginal water flies, which is fine. But there is, buried in the history of the sport are mayflies. I mean, Halford in England, that's where it all came from, and that's where the Catskills. They're all about mayflies. So again, it's there's nothing in it other than the sort of romance and aesthetic of what a mayfly is.
Yes.
Right. So the Credit is unique in that way. The Beaver and the Upper Beaver and the Saugeen have excellent hatches as well. And they, again, a lot of mayflies too as well, which to me is that's really what the sport, an aspect of the sport, which I really like.
Yeah.
If I was closer to the Beaver, I'd probably fish the Beaver because it is also a really special place, like the Upper Beaver.
The most dense hatches I've ever seen in Ontario are on the Beaver. I mean, so dense that when you walk into, I sent Mitch a picture of I have a Penn State sweatshirt on. That's on.
He sent us that picture. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's on the Beaver, and I'm standing in the middle of a spinner fall that is so dense that you can hear their wings.
That's cool.
And when you cast your fly rod, you hear tick, 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 tick from the fly going through. It's just,
that's cool.
That was a great day, and that there must have been billions of mayflies and one fish rising. It's like, it's the mystery of the sport. Why would there be a million fish rising, you know?
Yes, totally.
That happened to me and Mitch.
Yeah, I was
Remember
just
the
thinking about
Hendrickson
that.
hatch?
Yeah.
Although I will say that video that Aldo you shot with Mitch was beautifully done, and it was so well done, catching that brown. And when Mitch got that brown, it's really hard to catch them there because the current was really tricky.
Oh, come on. You know, I mean, it's for guys like me, it's you know, piece of cake, baby.
Wow.
It's more just in the muscles, and it's harder to explain how to do it, but
you're a legend in your own lunchtime.
Yeah. I don't know what the hell I'm doing out there, but it was fun, man. I missed that stuff. I want to get out there.
That was a good weekend too. That was the weekend of the gathering. We went to the gathering on Saturday, and then Mitch and I crashed in Fergus.
Yeah.
And woke up the next morning and fished Hendrickson's. It was great.
I think that was a great evening you had. You guys fished a really great spot into the dark, and that's to me, you got to admit that there's something about the aesthetic, the smell of the evening
100%,
air,
100%. The smell and the feel of everything. Yeah, it's just. Oh yeah. I dream about that stuff in the winter, man. And
remember there was those like almost like cannon blasts at one point.
Yeah, and it was
like
when it was pitch
I don't know
black.
if it was fireworks.
It was dark outside. We were trying to find the trail. We were lost in the middle of the woods, and we were hearing cannons going off. We're like, we got to get out of here, man. This is.
I don't know if they're fireworks or what was going on, but it was like, what the heck?
Well, it's funny. I remember there was one trout day or one springtime. It wasn't the opener, but it was after the opener, and I was fishing the mouth of this stream that went into the lake. And I remember sitting there, and all of a sudden I see a splash in front of me, like a bullet hit the water, and I thought, did I just see that? And then I see another one right in front of me, and all of a sudden I see another one, and I come to the realization that I'm standing there fishing, and someone's shooting a gun. And I'm thinking, what the hell's going on? I don't know what to do. So I lay down on the bank, and I crawl back into the bushes. And so I get into my car and I drive around. Well, there's two kids way up on a bank shooting at cans with a rifle. Jeez. And they're missing it, and it's going down to where I am and hitting the water.
Oh my God.
So, but you know what? That's the other thing about openers.
Yeah.
Trespassing is a big deal on openers.
Yeah.
Everybody trespasses, and they really should be careful and respect landowners.
Yeah, definitely don't trespass.
Absolutely.
Like, just stick to the permissible water, and like the rest of us, man, and get the fish the hard way. Come on.
Yeah.
You got to put in the time, baby.
Yeah, that's for sure. So
well, trout opener is although we weren't able to get out and fish trout opener, it was awesome talking about all the trout openers that you've experienced and reliving some of our fun ones from the last few years. You know what's next, though? With trout opener comes bass opener. That's the next one coming up, and maybe that's when we'll be able to actually get out on the water and have some fun together.
I hope so. Well, that particular spot is legendary for catching bass on a fly rod.
Yeah, it's great, man.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I think about it every day.
It's now my own personal legend.
Yeah. You're on the island there too, eh? Aldo and Mitch, remember when we went?
That was fun.
Oh, so much fun.
Yeah.
Well, we'll all have our own personal trout openers, and hopefully that'll be all together.
Hopefully.
Well, I will probably, just like I said earlier, take a drive around and just see the extent of what's happening, so
see what's going on.
It's always a spectacle, it's always a spectacle.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, everybody and listening too, stay safe during these crazy times. Be respectful. Don't park in the street and trespass and whatever else. And if you can stay home, stay home. And but thanks, Joe, for coming on the show. Honestly, it was super fun. It's always super fun talking, and
thank you.
It's we really appreciate all the stories and the laughs. Everybody at home, thanks for listening to this episode, and we'll get another one coming at you next Sunday. Check out our YouTube channel. We got some stupid videos up there. Of us
and some good videos like the dry fly one,
and some good ones, but we've been tying flies blindfolded. We're going crazy, Joe.
It's mainly stupid ones.
It's mainly stupid ones. But check them out, and thanks for listening. And that's it for me, Mitch, Aldo.
Thank you, everybody.
Yilma.
Thanks for listening.
And Joe.
Thank you, guys.
You can find all of SoFly's content at SoFly.ca. On Instagram, we're at the SoFly Crew. You can reach us at thesoflycrew@gmail.com with any questions, comments, or concerns. On Facebook, we're SoFly, and our podcast is available on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify.